That's oh, for the nose. Yeah. Can you play with me? My preschooler asked. Not now, I said. I have too much work to do around the house. Taking my hand and with the wisdom of one who has lived many a lifetime, he said, Mom, I have advice for you. When people tell me to do work, I don't listen to them. Then I don't have work to do. It works for me. You should try it. Be nice if it was that easy. A book I ordered arrived in the mail. I unwrapped it and flipped through it, through its pages. My 21-year-old son, Sean, was at the other end of the table, gesturing as if he wanted to see the book. I started to hand it to him when he stopped me. No, I'll take the trash, Sean said. What would I do with a book? You know, and unfortunately that's true. Statistically, they say that after high school, other than reading books for like your work where you have to go through information and stuff, other than that, students will never read a book again. Well, yeah, sure, it would count as a book. Okay, so I wanted to, Lord, make this brief. I wanted to talk about first a couple of scriptures that I think are very important. And one of these things we realized when we got saved. It says, there is a way which seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. It took revelation and sometimes a hit on the head to get our attention to see that we needed the Lord. That's from Proverbs 14:12, and it's always good to put it in your testimony. And then the other is Romans 1:21-22, which we've talked about before. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. And this is, an explanation of the culture that we live in throughout the world. People who are, they're having fits over global warming, and they're really upset at Trump for, pulling us out of the Paris Agreement. You can't get away from this stuff. I went to a movie theater 2 nights ago with my son to watch Dunkirk, which is supposed to be historical fiction, and it was, it was pretty good, kind of different kind of movie, but in the trailer, it doesn't really show the French in a positive light, but yeah. Well, the French were being evacuated too, but before the movie, they show you all these different trailers of different movies, and there was one with Al Gore talking about an inconvenient truth. They're coming out with a new movie, and how it's critical that we do something because we're going to be flooded by water and we're going to drown, type thing. And, it's just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, but yet if you were to say that in a crowd of people, they would laugh you to scorn. Kind of like as Jesus said to the people, the little girl's not dead, and this is God who's talking to them, and they don't get it, and they're just laughing at him like, she's dead, what are you talking about? And it's kind of like evolution, getting to evolution is like the flat earth theory was, hundreds of years ago. Now, from what I've read or documentaries I've seen, a lot of people didn't really believe in a flat earth, but they were popular, myths or whatever. Some people did. So, if you ran across a person today that believed in a flat earth, you would probably just laugh to yourself and go on your way. It's like, that's so stupid. Well, that's the same way we should be reacting to evolution. It is so stupid, extremely stupid. And the more I'm reading this book, the madder I'm getting about how stupidly, we have been treated. The scientists in the world, they're treated like priests and prophets. And they know it all, even though they might tell you after they publish something, a year or two later, oh, we were wrong about that, it's this way now, so they're constantly changing, what's true and what's not true. Yeah. It's called the Evolution Handbook. I mentioned it last week. It's got almost 1,000 pages, and this is a trimmed down model. You can find it online, and I'm going to give you a paper at the end where you can, if you want to get online, you can look at it. And it's got chapters. There are 27 chapters in this, and it's And it's got not just opinion, but it's got scientists' quotes from people who are creationists as well as people who are evolutionists. Many of the scientists in the evolutionary realm have said, you know, this doesn't make sense. And some have gone to the other extreme where they say there's got to be creative design. There had to be someone who did this. And okay. Okay, good. Well, I'm getting the information from the Evolution Cruncher. I am not an expert in science, but I did go to college, as many of you did, and you had science in high school and science in college, and, you know, we're not idiots. And, you know, we can't expound like an expert can expound, but, you know, there's things that just don't make sense. And so I want to bring up some of those things. First of all, if you look around you, you see the clouds, the seas, the mountains, the grass, the plains, the birds, and you look at the stars in the sky, and there's like, they consider 100 billion universes with 100 billion stars each. I mean, more than that. And it goes on and on and on. They haven't been able to find an end to the universe, and they know that it's expanding. And yet all these things were made of matter and energy. So where did it all come from? And the evolutionary scientists, especially with the Big Bang Theory, tell you that it came from nothing. Really, nothing. So this is what's being taught to our children in school. Now, they may not say, oh, this is evolution, but everything is like seen through the filter that evolution is true. So everything they present, even though it may just be, you know, mathematical facts, that's fine, but everything they're pushing is one way. It's kind of like with the political realm. Everything is a liberal democratic way, and if you think anything different, well, you know, what do you know? So we have the Big Bang Theory, where a large quantity of nothing decided to pack tightly together and then exploded outward into hydrogen and helium and into a frictionless space, and eventually formed stars, galaxies, planets, and moons. It all sounds so simple, just as you would find in a science fiction novel. George Lemaitre, who was a Belgian, and George Gamow, R.A. Alpher, and R. Herman, just so I'm giving you names, these people really did live, in 1927 came up with the theory of Big Bang. And they devised the model in 1948. And according to the theory, in the beginning there was no matter, just nothingness. And then it condensed by gravity into a single tiny spot, and then it decided to explode. That explosion produced protons, neutrons, electrons, which flowed outward at incredible speed throughout empty space, for there was no other matter in the universe. Now, they don't ever tell you how did it all of a sudden start going in circular motion and start rotating in different, you know, different orbits for the different stars. It formed themselves into typical atomic structures of mutually orbiting hydrogen and helium atoms. Gradually, the outward racing atoms are said to have begun circling one another and then producing gas clouds, which then push together into stars. Okay, it sounds like something you would tell to a kid you know, at night in their bedtime story. These first stars repeatedly exploded. It took at least 2 explosions to produce other heavier elements. Now, the Big Bang Theory is based on this extreme. It may look good. They can, like math, they can impress you with their math, but it can't actually happen. A tiny bit of nothing packed so tight that it explodes. Nothingness cannot pack together. Vacuum has no density. There would be no ignition to explode nothingness. There is no way to expand it. Nothingness cannot produce heat. So it's really a fizzle. They're out of gas. According to the theory, now note this, the older stars should have more heavy elements because they are continually making them. So the older a star is, it should have more of these elements, if you just follow logic of the way things work. but the so-called older stars have been found to have no more heavy elements than the so-called younger stars. How can that be? You know, it's like as you get older, you get gray hair. Well, because I'm older, I have more gray hair, right? But what about, you know, in this case, the younger stars have this same element too. It doesn't make sense. Not too good of an example, but all stars from young to old have the same amount of heavy elements. So let's talk about the planet Earth. There's a lot of evidence that it is quite young. There were over 57 different points that scientists can make to show that the planet Earth is not old, that it's actually young. First of all, in the stars themselves, we have star clusters. Science tells us that some of these clusters with their stars are moving rapidly, so rapidly together in a certain direction that it should be impossible for them to remain together if the universe were very old. If over a period of time, and they're talking about billions and billions and billions of years, if you believe evolution, they would have started to move apart. High energy stars, some stars are radiating energy so intensely that they could not possibly have survived for a long period of time. They don't have enough fuel within them, within the sun, each of their suns, to produce this much energy over a long, long, long period of time. It's like, you know, your car and your gas in your car, it only will get you so far, and then you have to get more. Well, these stars don't have any other source of energy but what's inside the star. And they're saying that it's billions of years old, but there's not enough energy within the star for it to burn as long as they say it has burned. Hydrogen in the universe, according to one theory of solar energy, hydrogen is constantly being converted into helium. That's what makes as the stars shine. But hydrogen cannot be made by converting other elements into it. According to Fred Hoyle, a leading astronomer, he maintains that if the universe were as old as the Big Bang theorists contend, there should be little hydrogen in it, because the hydrogen would have been burned up over billions and billions of years. And yet, there is so much hydrogen in our universe that it shows that it must be very young. Solar collapse. Stars, suns, as they burn, they eventually start to get smaller and smaller because they're burning up so much energy. And according to, it's called shrinkage, and they have measured our own sun as to how much it shrinks. And it says at its rate of shrinkage, as little as 50,000 years ago, the sun would have had to have been so large that our oceans would boil. You know, it's constantly getting smaller. If you think of it in tens of thousands and millions of years, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Well, 50,000 years ago, it would have been so large that life on this planet would be untenable. And you say, well, of course, but evolutionists believe that there has been life on this planet for millions of years. Yeah, there's a problem there. Solar neutrinos, I have no idea what they are, but apparently all the stars produce them. As they get older, they produce more, and our sun is not producing any, which by their own statistics should show that this is a recently created sun. Comets, scientists don't even know where they come from or how they're formed, but they give off water and gas, and a careful study that the effect of the dissolution process of the comets would have totally dissipated them within 10,000 years. So if our planet and the solar system and the universe are millions, billions of years old, there wouldn't be any comets around, according to what they understand. And the comet water would have, according to the scientists, if that's true, and the Earth is 1 billion years old, our oceans would be filled with several times over with water. And solar wind, there are little particles in space that are like 100,000th of a centimeter in diameter, and solar wind should have blown all those little particles out of our solar system if the solar system is as old as they say it is, because They are being blown out at a certain rate, and by the amount of particles we have in our solar system, they can tell, well, this can't be an old solar system. It's got to be a young one. It can't be billions of years old. There's solar drag. I'm not going to get into that. There's the composition of Saturn's rings. This is interesting. The rings on Saturn, they've sent satellite out, and they've found that the rings are made of solidified ammonia, which has a much higher vapor pressure than even ice. And reputable scientists recognize that it could not survive long without vaporizing off into space. Those rings are eventually going to be gone because of the ammonia particles that are in the rings. And, but this shows that it's not as old as everybody thought it is. It couldn't be billions of years old and still have those rings existing. Let's see. Go on. Moon dust. I mentioned this last week, and this is interesting. Most people don't know that one of the reasons we spent so much money to send rockets to the moon was to see how thick the dust was on the surface. I never heard that when I was growing up. Why would they want to know how much dust is on the surface? Because they can tell how fast things have been deteriorating, and they can figure out an age for the moon. By the cosmic radiation that comes from the sun, it affects the boulders and whatever, and it turns it into dust over a period of a long time. According to evolutionists had long held to the fact that the Earth and the moon are about the same age. It is believed by many that the Earth and the moon are billions of years old. If that were true, the moon would now have built up 20 to 60 miles layer of dust on it. What's that? Yeah, it would. Now, Isaac Asimov, you've probably heard of him. He is a scientist. He's dead now. He was Jewish, an atheist, and he was into science. He also wrote science fiction books. He wrote in 1958, I get a picture, therefore, of the first spaceship to the moon, picking out a nice level place for landing purposes, coming slowly downward tail first and sinking majestically out of sight. Now, they were so concerned about it, well, let me give you some of the details here. In 5 to 10 billion years, 3 or 4 ten-thousandths of an inch per year would produce 20 to 60 miles of dust. Okay, and they're saying billions of years old, so according to their own statistics, they know how fast it deteriorates in a year, and they just start, multiplying. In view of this, our men at NASA were afraid to send men to the moon. Landing there would be buried. They would be buried in dust and quickly suffocate. So NASA first sent an unmanned lander to the surface, which made the surprising discovery that there was hardly any dust on the moon. In spite of that discovery, Neil Armstrong was decidedly worried about this dust problem as his July 1969 flight of Apollo 11 neared. He feared that his lunar lander would sink deeply into it, and he and Edwin Aldrin would perish. Okay, so this is a real concern for him because they didn't know for sure. But because the moon is young, they had no problem. There is not over 2 or 3 inches of dust on its surface. That is the amount one would expect if the moon were about 6,000 to 8,000 years old. So we're taking their own science and showing, wait a minute, this doesn't fit. This doesn't make sense. Dr. Littleton's facts were correct. Solar radiation does indeed turn the moon rocks into dust. With only a few inches of dust, the moon cannot be older than a few thousand years. It's significant that the studies on the moon have shown that only 1/60th of 1 or 2 inch dust layer on the moon originated from outer space. This has been corroborated by still more recent measurements of the influx rate of dust on the moon. They've been doing it ever since Apollo 11. So it can't be an old moon. They can tell by the amount of soil on the surface. They can tell by the lunar isotopes. And this is like isotopes. What are you talking about here? I took chemistry and science in high school, but I didn't do too well in it. But according to this information, many wonder what the value there is in collecting moon rocks. What's the big deal about moon rocks? I think some lunar dust was just sold for like over $1 million. Yeah, you can sell them, but they're so. One of the most surprising moon rock discoveries is seldom mentioned because it doesn't fit in with their evolutionary theory. They're not going to tell you. Short-lived uranium-236, that element, and thorium-230, most were found in those stones. Short-term radioactive isotopes do not last long. They quickly turn into their end product, which is lead. So you have this uranium, which over time turns into lead. Well, if it was really super old, like they say the moon is, 1 billion years, there would be no elements, uranium-236 or thorium-230. It would have already turned into lead. If the moon was even 50,000 years old, these short-life radioisotopes would long since have decayed into lead. But instead, they were relatively abundant in the moon rocks, which shows that, oops, you mean it's not 1 billion years old? But they're not telling you that. The importance of this should not be underestimated. The moon cannot be older than several thousand years. Now, we have lunar radioactive heat. A variety of very conflicting dates have resulted from these tests, but the factor of relatively high radioactivity of the rocks indicates a young age for the moon. Now, they have dating systems, which I'll talk to you if we have time, and it's very inconsistent. They only take the facts that fit their theory. There should be low radioactive radioactivity on the rocks in the moon because it's billions of years old. Lunar gases. Let's see. Several inert gases have been found on the surface of the moon. Scientists believe that these gases came from the sun in the form of solar wind. Mathematical calculations reveal that at today's intensity of solar wind, the amount of inert gases found on the moon would be built up in 1 to 10,000 years, and no longer. These calculations are based, I'm not going to skip that, even 20,000 years ago would be far too lengthy a time. Therefore, the moon cannot be older than 6 to 10,000 years by the amount of gas that's built up on the moon. We have helium. Let's see. I'll skip that. I'm just letting you know there are other things here that I'm not putting in because it would take too long, and also, you know, after a while your eyes start to glaze over and you go, "Ooh, I've had enough," you know. Of course, Joanne shared that in preschool or in the kindergarten or the Sunday school, yeah, that, you know, you're sharing a story and they can only handle so much, and when they're, you know, it's too much, they then fall back on their backs and put their feet up in the air and just, you know, they're ready to do something else. So if anybody falls back on their back and put their feet up in the air, I'll know I need to stop. Right. Okay, let's run. No. Atmospheric helium. The radioactive decay of either uranium or thorium produces helium according to evolutionary theory. These decay chains have been going on for billions of years and should therefore have produced a much larger quantity of helium than is found in our world. The amount of helium on our planet is far too small if our world existed long ages. There ought to be 100,000 times as much helium in the atmosphere as there is. And this is a quote from a scientist, and the article was, "What happened to the Earth's helium?" that was published in 1964. So there are some scientists that are saying, wait, this doesn't make sense. But the agenda is evolution is true and all this other stuff is wrong, you know, which goes against the scientific theory. You know, scientists ideally come up with a theory and then they do these certain tests and they find out whether the theory is true. And if they realize, oh, that's not right, they change their theory to fit the facts. Well, that hasn't happened with evolution because that's their belief system, because they can then ignore God and say there is no God. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We have here another evidence of a young Earth for the amount of meteorites and meteorite dust earlier accumulated in rock strata, that's here on Earth, in relation to the amounts reaching the Earth at present would indicate an age of thousands of years, not millions. The Earth's rotation is another thing. Did you know that our Earth is rotating it's getting slower over long periods of time? The spin of the Earth, which is now about 1,000 miles per hour, or 1,609 kilometers per hour, is gradually slowing down. Gravitational drag, forces of the sun, the moon, and other factors cause this. If the Earth were really billions of years old, as claimed, it would have already stopped turning on its axis. And our world would be much different with no turn. Lord Kelvin, the guy who invented the temperature scale, back in the 1800s, used this slowing rotation as a reason why the Earth could not be very old. The decline in rotation rate is now known to be greater than previously thought. Now, here's another one that's interesting, is the magnetic field decay. The magnetic field is actually decaying, and they've taken data from over 135 years, and they have come up with a constant rate of decay and shown that our magnetic field is decreasing exponentially. In 1835, the German physicist K.F. Gauss made the first measurement of the Earth's magnetic dipole moment. That is the strength of the Earth's internal magnet. Additional evaluations have been carried out every decade or so since then. And since 1835, the global magnetism has decreased 14%. They figured that going back, if you extrapolate backwards, that 7,000 years ago, the Earth would have had a magnetic field 32 times stronger than it is now. Just 20,000 years ago, there would be enough joule heat, I guess because of the magnetic force, that it would have liquefied the Earth. And 1 million years ago, the Earth would have had greater magnetism than all objects in the universe and would have vaporized. So according to their own, theories, the Earth can't be 1 billion years old or even 1 million years old. Then there's escaping natural gas. They found it in, porous permeable rock, and the fluids can easily travel through rock, but more slowly pass out of the impermeable cap. Evolutionary theory postulates that tens of hundreds of millions of years ago, the oil and gas were trapped in there. If the world were billions of years old, all the natural gas would have escaped, because it's leaching out of the Earth, whether we like it or not, and it's, of course, in very, very small amounts, but it would be gone by now. And then there's the idea of the molten Earth. If we're really 1 billion years old, the molten inner core would have cooled by now. The thickness of ocean sediments, about 29 billion tons of sediment is added to the ocean each and every year. If the Earth were billions of years old, the ocean floor would be covered by sediment from land measuring 60 to 100 miles, and all the continents would be eroded away. But instead, we find only a few thousand feet of sediment in the ocean. Something's not right. The trees. The giant sequoias of California have no known enemies except man. And we were only a problem just recently by using saws. They have the ability to easily, we can destroy them, but insects do not bother them. Forest fires don't bother them. They live on century after century, yet the sequoias are never older than 4,000 years, which is around the time that scientists think the flood was. These giant redwoods seem to be the original trees that existed in their timber stands, along with, the saplings that came from them. So think of it. Today we have one generation of sequoias. Both the parent trees and their offspring are still alive. There is no record of any tree other than, or any other living thing that is older than any reasonable date given for the Genesis flood. Historical records. Historical records only go back about 3,500 BC. Why is that? If man has been on the planet for millions of years or 1 million years, it should go back further than that. What's that? Yep. Now, solar eclipses are really important because they have been mentioned by man going back in time, And they can't find any mention of solar eclipses further back than 2250 BC. And that enables scientists to predict, okay, that's how old it was because, we can track the solar eclipses that they're talking about. The earliest Chinese date, which can be assigned with any probability, is 2250 BC, based on astronomical reference in the Book of History, according to the Chinese. Languages. We know the differences in dialect and language suddenly developed shortly after the flood, at which time men separated and traveled off in groups whose members could understand one another, and that's according to Genesis 11. The records of ancient languages never go back beyond 3000 BC, and they appear to radiate outward from the area of Babylonia. Population statistics. If they can estimate, they take a normal amount of population growth, like from 1650 to 1850. We know our population has exploded because of technology, and people aren't just struggling to survive, and we've been able to, combat through God's, help, diseases and things like that. But by using this growth rate, if in contrast the human race had been on Earth 1 million years, as the evolutionists declare, even with a very low growth rate of 0.01%, that's 1/100th% annually, the resulting population by the time of Christ would be 2 times 1043 people. That's a 2 followed by 43 zeros. 1,000 solar systems with 9 planets like ours could barely hold that many people packed in solid. And then we have the theories that the evolutionists continue to change. They don't tell you this, but in 1862, Thomson said the Earth was 20 million years old. 35 years later, in 1897, he doubled it to 40 million. 2 years later, Jay Jolly said it was 90 million. Rayleigh in 1921 said the Earth had been more than 1 billion years old. 11 years later, W.O. Hotchkiss moved the figure up to 1.6 billion. A. Holmes in 1947 declared it to be 3.35 billion. And in 1956, he raised it to 4.5 billion. Just now, the age of the Earth stands at about 5 billion years. Pretty soon, someone's going to raise it again. And yet it doesn't fit in with all the science that they're supposed to believe, because it's not really, it's a belief system based on their desire not to be accountable to God. And now, one guy joked that perhaps in 10 years it's going to be 5 billion years. Let's see. So, this is really cool. I didn't know this, is that the major basement rocks of our planet is granite. It did not originate from gradual cooling of molten lava. They can prove that. But came into being in their present solid form. The fact completely disproves the Big Bang and every evolutionary theory of the origins of stars in our world. Those major rock formations came into existence within space of less than 3 minutes time. And I don't understand all the science behind it, but they can figure by the radio halos that are generated from the rock, the half-life, and they can figure out that the granite formed in just 3 minutes, which goes with God spoke and the worlds came into existence. There are independent halos that develop their half-life halo in only 3 minutes, and the rock in which they are found had to be solid at the time it was first brought into existence, or those halos could not form inside it. So the halos that are there had to be inside of a solid rock, not something that's molten. However, all evolutionary theories say that the Earth was molten for millions of years. Let's see. Now, radio dating, there's like 20 different methods, and they all make no sense. There's a radioactive dating that's called carbon-14 dating, or radiocarbon dating, and it's based on the formation of radioactive elements of carbon. There are 7 initial assumptions that they have in order to be able to use it to figure out how old something is. each system, number one, each system has to be a closed system. That is, nothing can contaminate any of the parents or the daughter products while it's decaying, while they're going through the decay process. Each system must initially have contained none of its daughter products. So when something starts to decay, it produces other elements, it produces other things, and you can't, in order to be able to date something as to how old it is, you have to have these conditions. It's got to be a closed system. You can't have any daughter products, which there's no way that they can then do that. The process rate must have been the same and not changed. And they've already shown that they can change the rate of decay. Let's see. Yet we have no way of going back into past ages and ascertaining whether that assumption is correct. The most fundamental of all of the initial assumptions is that all radioactive clocks include carbon-14, and that there's a constant decay rate, and they don't know that. Let's see. This scientist, he found the evidence that the long half-life minerals have varied in their decay rate in the past. So this guy, Jolly is his name, his suggestion of varying rates of disintegration of uranium at various geological periods would, if correct, set aside all possibilities of age calculation by radioactive methods. And yet you'll watch documentary after documentary and they said, yeah, we use this radioactive dating and we know that it's blah, 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 blah years old. Baloney. You don't know, because you're just taking a system that doesn't work and saying, yeah, that's, and they're using words and principles to impress you, but it's garbage.
That's where faith comes.
That's right.
In high school, they told us that it wasn't reliable.
Yeah.
I must have gone to a strange school.
Yeah, well, I remember finding that out in college, that it wasn't reliable. And yet they'll tell you that it, you know, they won't say it's reliable. They'll just publish these facts as though that's the God's truth, you know, on the whole matter.
That's called gratuitous assertion. You have to challenge gratuitous assertion.
Right. And the scientists are held in such awe by our society that nobody dare question a scientist. And if another scientist does and comes against the evolutionary theory, well, he doesn't get his funding to continue his research because there's an agenda and it has to support evolution. Okay, I'm going to get to that. Problems with all radio dating methods. The rocks brought back from the moon provided an outstanding test for the various dating methods. Because all those techniques were used on them, the results were a disaster. They said, well, let's use all these different methods and we'll take the moon rocks and we'll see how old it is. None of them agreed. They are spread, the age spread of certain moon rocks varied from 2 million to 28 billion years. Now scientists are arguing over the results. We have a weighty scientific problem and a headache for evolutionists. You know, they're not going to give up their faith in evolution, but they're going to argue, but you know, they're going to come up with something. The moon has to be less than 10,000 years old if you take the amount of uranium and so forth, thorium that's on the moon, in the moon rocks. Time magazine, June 19th, 1964, reported an intriguing item which was overlooked by much of the scientific community. Although scientists generally consider that no known force can change the rate of atomic disintegration of radioactive elements, researchers at Westinghouse Laboratories have actually done it. They changed the rate. And then you might think, well, with granite, what would happen? Can they melt granite and then have it cool and be granite again? It produces something else. So it could never have been molten and be granite. So the inaccurate dating is really circular reason. First of all, early in the 19th century, evolutionists decided that fossils in certain rock strata should be such and such an age. They came up with a date. And so they gave the strata containing these fossil dates which would match their fossil age theories. Okay, so they figured it's got to be this old, and then they took their theories and they made it fit what they thought it was. Then they announced that they had thought up the dates by peering at so-called index fossils. They declared that they could now prove the age of fossils in the rocks by rock strata they were in. Thus, they started out by dating the strata by imagined dates of fossils. They just came up with a figure. And they ended up dating the fossils by applying those same imagined dates to the strata, which doesn't make sense. This is interesting. Evolutionists decided, let's see, scientists have tried to correlate radioactive dating with the dates they applied to the fossils. So they tried the radioactive dating method. And strata, a century before dating was known, but they have not been able to do so. Out of literally thousands of tests, they have been able to correlate only 3 of them. So they did all these tests, and only 3 came out to the numbers that they were looking for. So guess what? They say, yeah, see, here we got it. And they ignore all the false tests and tell you only the 3 that came out to what they want. Now, I read, getting onto a different subject, global warming, I read that the scientists, they keep temperatures all over the world, and they're saying by those temperatures, how much our Earth is growing warmer so much for every year, and at the end of 50 more years, we're going to be burned up or whatever. They just go to these extremes. But they don't tell you that they ignore data that doesn't fit. When they have instruments all over the world, some of those instruments are in a parking lot. What do you think the temperature is going to be for something in a parking lot? Radiating all that sun off the tar versus in a field. And as I found out, there's lots of data that doesn't fit their global warming message, so they eliminate those temperatures. They only go with the temperatures that fit what they want to tell you. It's just incredible. So, I'm almost done. It may come as a shock, but fewer than 50% of the radiocarbon dates from geological and archaeological samples in northeastern North America have been adopted as acceptable by investigators. So they threw out 50% of their tests. Don't worry about it. Flint and Rubin declare that radiocarbon dating is consistent within itself. What they do not mention is that published C4 dates are only consistent because of the very large number of radiocarbon dates which are not consistent are discarded. They're not giving you the ones that don't fit their method. They throw that out. But they're not telling you that. Bunch of liars. Even modern specimens are inaccurate. So they decided, well, let's test with things that we know. They had a mortar from an Oxford castle in England that was dated by radiocarbon dating as 7,370 years old. Yet the castle itself was only built 785 years ago. So you take things that you know. Okay, let's take that castle. It was built like, about 1,200. Let's see, what it says on this. 7,000 years old? Really? Right. Freshly killed seals have been dated at 1,300 years. This means they are supposed to have died over a millennium ago. Other seals, of which have been dead no longer than 30 years, are dated at 4,600 years. So it's a bunch of baloney. Okay, one thing I wanted to give to you, I think the bigger problem amongst the choir here is that we know Christians who can conveniently say, yeah, I believe in creation, yeah, I believe in Jesus, and I don't doubt them, they do. But they, in order to fit in, they mix in, well, yeah, I believe that, God, it wasn't 6 days and 6 nights, and then the 7th day he rested. That was really, millions and billions of years, which we know is impossible. But I have here problems with the Big Bang creationism from a Christian point of view. Some very earnest Christians are accepting a theory of origins which was devised by atheists in the 1940s in a desperate attempt to deny the existence of God as the creator. These folks may be very sincere. They still believe in God, but they're mixing Darwinism in with their belief system. So this goes through how the Big Bang theory is wrong. It just gives a couple of points. It's you can use this kind of just to review what we've talked about, and you can even share some of it with somebody who's a Christian, but yet believes that, you know, the stars have been around for billions and billions and trillions of years. And so this is just a 2-page kind of a synopsis. And what's that? Yeah, you can have it, reproduce it. I got this off the internet, and the Evolution Handbook is run by Christians. It's a ministry. They say you can take anything you want and reproduce it however many times you want. So I'm gonna give you this. It talks about how the theory of billions of years ignores the truth. So let me pass this out to you. Someone else pass out, sorry. And on the top, I have the name of the book that I got it from, and then the website is evolution-facts.org, and it's up there for the first time.
Of our universe, of the known universe, is increasing. So there's lots of things that just don't make sense. Science now are examining, for instance, the atoms, and they're starting to think that the laws that they made up to talk about why the atoms hold together are becoming invalid. And yeah, and I don't know. I love the verse in it's Colossians 1:17. Christ is before all things, and holds all creation together.
Yeah, they don't know how the atoms are being held together, but we know that it's the Lord, and we've had that mentioned by Stephen Peck has mentioned that several times, and you know we know about the scripture. Les has talked about it in the past. Yeah, gluon. They should have done it to Latin or something, then we'd really be impressed. But, so the problems with the Big Bang Theory from a Christian point of view, and as I told you before, Darwinism is diametrically opposed to Christianity. You can't, they're going in opposite directions. You can't, and be honest with yourself and understand the science behind this. You can't say that the universe is billions of years old. You have to acknowledge that there is a creator. And so here's, it talks about the problem of Big Bang and what it teaches, its advantage, why it can't be scientifically accurate, and it lists chapters here. And, you know, I told you this is not a novel, this is like an encyclopedia. You just look at it for whatever chapter interests you, and they've got highlighted things, so you can just read the highlights and get whatever information you want from it, and use it with your discussion with other people that believe in evolution. But it lists the chapters, and on the back it lists several other things that are wrong about it, and it goes to the scriptures. You know, Jesus talked about Adam, but in evolutionary theory, Adam couldn't have existed. We just evolved from the apes, who evolved from the protoplasm, or whatever it was, and eventually from nothing. Yes, they've never found a crossover link from one species to another. Never. If they did, you would hear about it in the news. But, you know, I'm afraid that someday they're going to say they did and just be lying through their teeth. You know, they have no problem. You can see our culture today. No problem with lying. Just don't get caught. Yes, there have been several hoaxes, and the book talks about the hoaxes that were that were used in the 1800s and 1900s. So that's it. Yes.
For Christians now who believe, he never said it was good. That was the only day that the day of rest. He didn't say it was good. And the projection on that is that God, knowing the fall of man, just like he prepared for it with the lamb slain before the foundation of the world, that as in that preparation for it, that now for these 1,000 years today, there's 6,000 years, and then the seventh day when Jesus comes back and sets up his millennial period, the day will be rest again. So it's like a preparation. Then it'll be good. Then it'll be good, because it's not finished until you say good, because tov, which is the word for good, also means complete. So it's not complete yet until that final seventh day, which is when he returns. And of course, from Jesus, we're in the third day, which is, there's a lot about that. Laverne talks a lot about that. From the resurrection. We're in the third day of resurrection and life. Yeah. So, harvest. Hey. And then he comes back, and there's a rest period and a new creation on the 8,000 year.
Right. And if you know the science that was behind talking about how the galaxy or the Earth's rotation is slowing down and the magnetic field is getting weaker, he's going to have to do something to fix it all. Well, why not just start over with a new creation, which he talks about, a new heavens and a new earth in Revelation 22.
One thing I want to point out in all this is that, God created us in his image, and we're intelligent, and he doesn't pull any punches throughout the entire Bible. He tells us the truth. So my biggest number one question in all this is, why would he lie to us if he did it differently? Yeah. In other words, Adam, who was, my personal opinion, he was far more intelligent than we are. And he literally named every animal with words he never spoke, descriptive words. So, inventing language as he went. And that, to me, is the danger of this, ultimately. And if you believe any of this stuff, what you do is you're calling God a liar. You're putting yourself in a very tenuous position with God, because when you start calling God a liar and you're ignoring the truth, and it gets back to what I was saying before, you start going off the path, and you got to be very careful about that when you decide to take things out of context and to put your own theory to them that's not based on revelation. So that's it. I just wanted to.
Thing too is, even if you watch the shows that they have on TV about, like we were watching a show one time about plants, and they said plants actually have families, and plants actually can defend themselves. Like there's a plant out in the desert that if it starts going down because of one bug that's bothering it, it will come back in another form, because that's how God created this plant. So, but they're like, isn't this amazing? But then you're like, how can plants be smarter than men? So of course it has to be God. You can't have a plant that knows how to morph into something different to protect itself. It'll develop a whole new flower so that this insect can't. But yeah. But they're trying, but it's like, it's too amazing. It's too smart. How can men have been that stupid while this plant is in the desert being really smart? It can't happen. But I have to say right. But I have to say too, coming from a different angle, I was raised with a family member, and of course that was older than me, and I looked up to this family member. And they would tell me things like, well, there can't be, the flood didn't happen. I mean, every culture has a flood myth, so how can that be? And I didn't realize at the time, I wasn't smart enough to realize, well, that just proves that they're wrong. So if you have people in your life that have recited these things to you over and over, and you know, that can be something you have to get over, but this is very valuable teaching so that at a younger age than me, you can say, well, wait a minute, what about this? You know, and say, you know, kind of have an argument.
Because I've only covered 3 or 4 chapters in the book. There are other things to talk about the fossil theory and about apes and humans and DNA and all that stuff. You can just go to it if something arises and check it out. Just use the book as an encyclopedia and check out whatever subject comes up that, you know, would fit. There's an index in the back that can help as well.
Anybody else? Thank you, Brian. Yes? Okay. Okay. Well, Father, Jennifer needs a healed foot. Needs that gangrene to die and go away in the name of Jesus Christ. We speak to that. Leave her body now. Flesh be restored. And come back in the name of Jesus. Shukriya le me kiara masakari andara mashaka. Speak life into her foot. Life. Mm-hmm.